this is The Big Fight and I'm Maria Shakil. India's Operation Sindoor is on a strategic hold. After having demonstrated its military and strategic capability, India has conveyed to the world that deterrence is what it was aimed at. India's restraint is not weakness, it is maturity, is what most war and defense experts think. India imposed costs, redefined thresholds, and retained escalation dominance. India struck at the heart of the terror establishment inside Pakistan. The message is clear: enough is enough. Prime Minister Modi has made it clear that India will not tolerate another terror attack emanating from Pakistan and will not refrain from taking a harder action in the future. The ball is now firmly in Pakistan's court. Will it continue to harbour terrorists, or will it learn its lesson and behave? One thing is clear, loud and clear, that Operation Sindoor is the new normal, and our neighbour, as well as the larger world, will have to deal with this reality. Defence Minister Rajnath Singh has put Pakistan on notice with a stern "picture abhi baki hai" warning. On the show tonight, we discuss what lies ahead or what lies next in this India-Pakistan saga. We have Lieutenant General Ata Hasnain joining us. We also have former Indian ambassador to France joining us, Javed Ashraf. Ambassador Ashraf, beginning with you, we'll be also joined by some British commentators in just a bit. Ambassador Ashraf, beginning with you, in terms of the messaging, do you think the world has understood that this is the new normal, that India will not tolerate and will not stop at targeting, right going inside Pakistan if the need be, if there is another misadventure?
Well, if the first, it's for Pakistan to recognize and realize the seriousness of the new doctrine, our posture, and the response that will follow any future terrorist attack. I think that's both what they have to see on the ground, but it is also what they have to recognize and believe at the psychological level. Because part of this deterrence must be also that there is an unambiguous message to the adversary that any future terrorist activities or an attack would involve or invite a retaliation that may even exceed what they have experienced so far. Of course, we're maintaining strategic ambiguity in terms of the scope, the scale, the nature, and the impact of a terrorist attack that would trigger a military response from our side. And that is important to maintain that kind of strategic ambiguity. And therefore, I think now we're at a stage where we have to be able to convey through information and psychological messaging that there is, and that in this particular episode, that the incidents that we have seen so far had been one in which we were able to inflict significant damage, that we would have prevailed in the escalation dominance, and that if this had escalated any further, the retaliation would have been at a much higher level, and that nothing that has happened will in any way shake or dilute our will to continue with the same course of action. Why I say this, Maria, is because they drew different conclusions in 1999 and in 2002. They drew a conclusion in 1999 that if it hadn't been for President Clinton's intervention, Pakistan would have prevailed. And in 2002, they drew a different conclusion, that is, Indian forces take a long time to mobilize, and therefore a very sharp surgical surprise attack on the neck of India can sever Jammu and Kashmir away from the rest of the country. And I say this because they had shared this with the Americans. Americans had shared this with us. We had conducted a separate study. So to us, apart from what we have inflicted, the nature of messaging, signaling both to Pakistan and to the international community on A, what was achieved, B, what would be the resolve if going forward on this, because Prime Minister has clearly articulated a doctrine which has some very important elements in it, and which actually goes beyond what we have done in after Pahalgam in Operation Sindoor, because it now formally erases the distinction between terrorists and state sponsors of terrorism, which was the third element. So I think that messaging now has to continue to be unambiguous and very, very clear. That's an important source of deterrence.
Okay. Daryl Kimball is also joining us. He's the Executive Director at Arms Control Association. But before that, Lieutenant General Hasnain, the question here is, in this military supremacy that India has, communicated, it has redefined thresholds. How effective do you think that communication was?
Maria, if you permit me, I will change your question.
Sure, sir.
It should be the capability which we have demonstrated, not communicated, demonstrated. Communication is something different. This is a question of demonstration here. We have shown them the political will, the technological superiority, the ability to strike at targets of choice. And I compliment Ambassador Ashraf for his understanding of the entire thing which he has explained. I would sum up that entire strategy which he's just spoken of as hybrid versus hybrid. You see, all this while, Pakistan has been targeting us with hybrid war, below the radar, terrorist actions, financial conduits, drug circuits all over, psychological warfare, information warfare. We have been targeting him with what? Just a military strike in 2016, an air strike in 2019. Those were strategic messaging, nothing more. This time a proper message of deterrence has gone. And also at the same time, since we have used other domains, like something which we never used to tread upon, the waters issue, the IWT issue, right? Diplomacy as a measure. All this has come together now. And as I said, the doctrine is all about, if you are going to go hybrid, we have different ways of going hybrid and countering your hybrid. So I think it's the restraint we have been able to convey, and at the same time, the message of deterrence that we have been be able to convey has been the marked achievement this time.
Okay, I'm going to come back to you again, Lieutenant General Hasnain. But Daryl Kimball, what do you think has been the big message that has been communicated through Operation Sindoor, which was carried out by Indian Armed Forces, according to you?
Well, I think we need to step back from the analysis of what each side achieved militarily in terms of messaging, and we need to understand that this was yet another close call between India and Pakistan involving kinetic warfare, precipitated by the heinous terrorist attack in April. And the two sides were once again lucky that there was not a more severe miscommunication about intentions, about targeting, a further escalation. And the question I think that should be asked at this stage and pursued by both sides is, how do we avoid miscommunication in the future? And that involves better diplomatic channels of communication before and during a crisis. And what are we going to be doing to reduce the risk that a future event is going to escalate to a full-out ground war, which this looked like it was going to become if there was not international mediation? And is there going to be a longer-term ongoing dialogue between the two countries about addressing some of the underlying issues that have fueled the tensions between India and Pakistan for all these years? I'm very concerned about the lack of reflection on both sides about how this may have gone wrong. So those are some of the things that I'm taking away from this. I agree with the previous speakers that India, the strikes were more powerful, they were targeted, they appear to have been effective in hitting the particular terrorist targets, but that alone is not going to eliminate the underlying motives of these militia groups and terrorists in the long term. And there was also, I think we need to acknowledge, concern on the part of the United States and others that the two sides might have been reaching a point at which this was going to escalate out of control. So those are my reflections on the situation, and I'm relieved that there's a ceasefire, but I'm concerned that there is not a longer-term plan for avoiding future conflicts and escalation scenarios.
General Hasnain, the point being made, of course, is also about contained time frame, in the sense that it all happened in a controlled precision and decisive, without hesitation. Those were the defining words when India carried out these precision strikes.
No, so then what exactly is the question that you are asking?
So, yes. So when Defence Minister says picture abhi baki hai, what does it actually mean?
This is what is communication. This is actually the whole business of hybridity. You go in with the restraint up to a point, and I agree with John Gimble that yes, there could have been miscommunication here, but we were all the time maintaining the pressure. That was important. And we made it very clear right in the beginning, we targeted terrorist infrastructure, the jihadi terror infrastructure. What we got in response from Pakistan was the next step towards escalation. And that was an attempted targeting of military garrisons and cities. That was clear escalation on their part. And it was India's strategic patience which ensured that we did not go beyond a certain step. We escalated to go against the airfields, etc. But then we were forced to do that. Without that, the messaging would not have gone home clearly. And it would have been Pakistan which would have come out the better at the end of it to say, see, exactly what we did in 2019, we could not respond to what they finally did from their side. So I think that restraint, which we have sort of demonstrated here, was a very, very important aspect, but it's not necessary that restraint is going to remain there. And it's not even necessary that the situation is going to continue to be the same, because the situation is still tenuous, and as already outlined by our Prime Minister, that the operation is continuing. Operation Sindoor is very much continuing. So that's the message which is there.
And another message, Ambassador Ashraf, was that this constant blackmail of nuclear weapon, which continued during those 4 days and even continues now.
Well, first of all, Maria, let me respond to Mr. Kimball's points of view. Now, first, I'd like to say that it's precisely this kind of double standards, this wisdom that is thrust upon us by Western countries, particularly the United States and the UK, that leads Pakistan to believe that it can get away with practicing cross-border terrorism. Whereas countries have flown aircraft and sailed aircraft carrier thousands of kilometers away in pursuit of terrorists and bombed places because of the security threats that they have faced, whether it is Sahel or whether it is Afghanistan or whether it is the Middle East. But they apply obviously a very different sets of standards for us. And if they think about talking in terms of two militarily capable, nuclear-armed powers, then I'd like to remind them that for 3 years they have been persisting in a war in Europe, in Ukraine, against a major nuclear power, Russia. And they have managed to do this for 3 years, despite the fact that Russia had, on a number of occasions, doled out nuclear threats over red lines being crossed. Of course, those red lines were crossed a number of times, and Russia did not follow through with its nuclear threats. So I don't think that that kind of sermon is particularly required over here. The second point I wanted to make is, in response to what he said, is that we've tried everything conceivable for the past 30 years to bring Pakistan to change its behavior. We've tried diplomatic engagement with Pakistan. Remember, after Pathankot, we had actually done the unprecedented thing of inviting ISI and Pakistan security agencies to jointly investigate. And what we got in return was obfuscations and denials. and absolute lack of any action, as it was also in the case of 2008 terrorist attack. We worked with the international community. We have seen what we have done in FATF and the UN Sanctions Committee. And none of this has changed Pakistan's behavior. In fact, through the 2000s, Pakistan received much larger sums of money every year for doing less and less in terms of the war in Afghanistan and in terms of taking or dismantling the terrorism infrastructure in our country. That was also the case after the Mumbai terror attack. So I don't see this kind of a wisdom prevailing. And let me tell you something that we haven't pointed out with regard to this particular response from India, that for the first time, we have changed the patterns of response, and take my words very carefully.
Okay.
And what we have done is taken control of the levers of post-attack developments in a way that has preempted international mediation, which in the past enabled Pakistan to get away with the terrorism by taking some cosmetic steps on terrorism. For example, hiding away Hafiz Saeed and Maulana Masood Azhar, putting some of them behind bars, taking some cosmetic steps on terror financing, etc. And as soon as the world forgot about it, they moved on and they all came back. So this time, that pattern of response has changed. And remember, we took the responsibility for our security in our own hands without waiting for a response. The message on the ground was very clear. The message from Prime Minister in his speech was even clearer going forward. And we have to look at diverse instruments of deterrence. And the deterrence comes both from imposing a cost and raising the cost of a terror attack. And it doesn't only mean punitive. I have also spoken about it. It has to be predictive. We have to improve that capacity. Although, as I say, terrorism wins by winning one day, security agencies lose by not winning all 365 days. We have to be doing better on preventive and preemptive measures, but the punitive steps will always be there. And I think when Prime Minister articulated that doctrine, which had, that Operation Sindoor remains in some sense operational, and the three-pronged doctrine going forward, and that no talks or trade or water till terrorism stops, clearly now, clearly lays down our position with regard to Pakistan. Now, will that stop? We have known all over the world that military force doesn't dismantle terrorism completely, but it certainly will raise the cost for them. And we will continue to work on diplomatic measures. We will continue to work on FATF, UN Sanctions Committee. We'll continue to engage our interlocutors in the West and to see if they really stand by their conviction on zero tolerance for terrorism, or is it that one set of terrorists need to be taken care of and others not? And the big question I have often raised is that there are countries that are considered state sponsors of terrorism who have done much less than Pakistan in terms of terrorist activities. And yet they continue to face comprehensive sanctions from Western countries, whereas Pakistan, which has, you look at any terrorist activity in Europe, United States, or anywhere, and you would find somewhere the link goes back into Pakistan. Yet they continue to receive massive aid, continue to enjoy good relations with the Western countries. So I think we in India have recognized that, this kind of wisdom that we get from the West is only meant for us. There is a different set of standards that they practice for themselves, whether it is in designating countries as state sponsors of terrorism or in the actions that they take. So that is but the message, and let me also use the word restraint, since restraint is actually a choice. It is not a compulsion. And it is only those who have power exercise restraint. And it is also always the greatest warriors, the greatest generals, who often act with the highest measure of restraint. This is true, and this has also been shown in the action that we took after what was not just an act of terrorism or linked to Jammu and Kashmir. It was meant to incite a religious conflagration everywhere.
Ambassador Ashraf, thank you so much. And I think it goes completely in sync what the topic of this discussion was, that restraint is not weakness, it is maturity. You are saying that restraint is a choice, not a compulsion. So thank you so much for joining us, Ambassador Ashraf, Lieutenant General Atta Hasnan and Daryl Kimball. We have British commentator David Vance joining us now. Mr. Vance, thank you. Most commentators and analysts are of the opinion that India has convincingly won this conflict between the two nations and that Operation Sindoor has been a decisive and a huge success. As someone who has a bird's eye view of what played out between the two countries, what's your assessment?
Yeah, no, I would agree with much of what you say. I believe that Operation Sindoor was a great success. I don't think, though, that the job is absolutely finished. I think that I'm actually of the opinion that it's a pity there was a ceasefire, because I think India has no option but to completely nuclearize Pakistan. It has to deal with the terrorism that is endemic in Pakistan. So I think it was a great success. The Western media has not presented it like that, disappointingly. They've presented it as if it were some kind of a draw, but it wasn't. Pakistan were well and truly whipped, and that's good.
Okay, Mr. Vance, one message certainly has been communicated is that India did not go for a prolonged war. It acted with great restraint. There was a goal which was achieved, and it managed to ensure that Pakistanis asked for ceasefire. And of course, but there is a picture which is being conveyed by the Western media. Why is it that the real picture is not coming out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the answer is that Pakistan is pretty good at international propaganda. I think it's very good at that. It's about the only thing it's good at. India, perhaps not just as good. But then again, I mean, the Western media itself is problematical. I mean, I have very little confidence in the Western media. But I've said, and this is the message I think that we should be getting out, that India's fight is the fight of the West as well. For the world to be safe and stable, we cannot have rogue nations like Pakistan operate in the way that they do. So I think it's in the interests of the US, the UK, the European Union, everywhere, to stand with India as it tries to deal with a very difficult problem. And Pakistan, it is difficult, not least because it's got China backing it to a significant degree. So we should be, but maybe India, and this is the thing that I try to do in my own small way. I try to put out in the Western media pro-India messages so that people in the West can better understand what India faces.
Mr. Vance, what according to you was the objective of Operation Sindoor, and in terms of its strategic supremacy, has India sent a huge message to the world?
Yeah, absolutely. I think India sent a huge message to Pakistan in the first place, insofar as it demonstrated India's complete military superiority over Pakistan. That was demonstrated very clearly. It also showed the rest of the world that India can, if necessary, stand alone against Pakistan. It doesn't need necessarily allies, although it would be good if it did. So by taking out, for example, the Pakistan terror infrastructure that it did, I mean, I think that's very positive. Although the problem is that, I don't think all terrorists, Pakistani terrorist groups operating from within Pakistan I don't think they've all been destroyed, and they should be all destroyed. So I think, yes, it was a really powerful message from Prime Minister Modi to the world and to Pakistan, and I hope they listen.
One view certainly is that India enforced a doctrine on sovereign terms, using sovereign means. David Vance, in terms of recent conflicts, how do you see India protecting its sovereignty when it had to?
Yeah, I think India has clearly sent a message to the world that it will protect its sovereignty, and Prime Minister Modi has shown he will do that which is necessary. And the rest of the world needs to understand that fully. But I think they probably do understand that military, from a military point of view, India has overwhelming superiority, and it's demonstrated at this in Operation Sindoor. So that's why I think it's a good thing. It needed to be done, to be honest. This operation was overdue, so it's really good that it's happened, and it should send a signal to those in Pakistan and to their supporters around the world that you do not trifle with India at your peril.
All right, David Vance, really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us on this edition of The Big Fight. That's all from me.